to the Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Matt Lutovsky, and it's that wonderful time of year when the teams play Interleague baseball. National League teams have to figure out who on their bench is worthy of a DH spot, or better yet, who's worthy enough to take the field and take someone else off the field who can then DH. And the American League teams get to figure out who they want to sit down.
Yes, it is that time, and Interleague kind of is what it is thing at this point. I personally don't view it. It's just games to me.
Yes.
People always do that thing where they mock like a Blue Jays Astros series, but there's a Royals Orioles series, every other day of the week. So what do I care? But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's
not that you hate Royals or Orioles fans or anything.
No, not at all. They're very pleasant. But ultimately, for fantasy purposes, we care about who's going to lose at-bats, DHs in the AL, playing in NL parks, losing at-bats, and then who's going to gain some at-bats.
So what are the most interesting scenarios you're seeing for American League teams that are going into those National League parks and potentially losing a DH? Yeah. They will lose their DH. How's that going to work out for them?
Right, and this is we're just talking about these three games coming up this weekend, and then it goes back to regular, and then the big stretch of Interleague starts in June 17th. But for this week, there are 6 AL teams playing in NL parks, losing their DH: Detroit, Texas, Tampa, Minnesota, Seattle, and Oakland. And I think probably the most interesting of that group is probably Texas, because Michael Young's the everyday DH. He's got to be in the lineup. He's hitting 340. You figure he plays first. That's about the only place you're going to play him. So that means Mitch Moreland, where does he go? Probably to the outfield. And that means a guy like Mike Napoli, who fantasy owners are already upset about his playing time. I don't see him playing much. I mean, obviously he could still catch, but it's going to be some weird hodgepodge of like Moreland or Napoli or even Young, only missing 2 games this weekend, something like that.
Well, Texas, they're not getting bat. They're not getting bat their 2 big bats in the outfield anytime soon, are they? With Hamilton and Cruz, so it might actually kind of work out for them, as opposed to somewhere like Detroit, where they've got some multiple fantasy relevant performers, 3 guys for 2 positions.
Yeah, I mean, you got the 2 catchers, Victor Martinez and Alex Avila, and then Brennan Bosch. And I think one of those guys, someone's sitting there, and it probably ain't going to be Victor, which means Avila, people, counting on, he's been a nice surprise as a catcher this year.
I guess there's a 0 chance or a non-zero chance that Miguel Cabrera could play somewhere else, but why would they do that?
Yeah, and I mean, you might run into something where maybe he gets a day off and they play Vic at first. I mean, because you never know what managers are going to do. That's what kind of makes it frustrating. But they're an interesting one. I think Tampa's interesting because Johnny Damon really has to be in the lineup, so he probably plays first. So now you're sitting Kochman, which, not a big deal, but what if they do something different and they sit Sam Fold, who a lot of people are, getting the steals from, or even Matt Joyce, who's really hot right now, but if it's a bad matchup for him, maybe they rework him so he sits a day. So you really have to stay on top of these things.
What about the National League teams going to the American League parts? In many cases, this is only going to be applicable to daily leads, where you can pick up the guy who's going to be your DH for this week or these particular games, and then drop him again.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at some players. For the most part, if it's a National League guy who isn't getting everyday at bats, you're not too concerned about him anyway. But I think a guy like Eric Hinsky, for instance, who's having a really solid year and he's killing righties, who the Braves only face righties these Friday, Saturday, Sunday, is a guy who now is going to play every day. He's been playing every day pretty much anyway somewhere. But I think a guy like him, if he's out there, you grab him definitely for these 3 days in a daily league. He's a good one. I think the Nationals are interesting because you got Nix, who's killing the ball. You got Morse. You got the return of Matt Stairs. This is what he was born to do.
The never-ending Matt Stairs.
Yes, but this is what he was born to do, is DH, which is why it's so puzzling he's on an NL team. But so those guys are going to start playing, and maybe there's value there. And I think Cincinnati the same way with like Heisey, Gomes, and some of their guys, who now maybe they'll be forced to play every day.
I'm actually kind of interested by St. Louis's situation because they do have injuries. They do have Matt Holliday and Lance Berkman both just recently left games with injuries that appear minor right now. We don't really know how they're going to be playing out. But they also do have a bunch of guys who could fit into multiple positions, and you might actually see Tony La Russa just scratching that itch that he always has to play guys in unusual positions, and you know what? Rotate. He might be able to fulfill his dream of having 3 completely different lineups in 3 straight days.
No, I think he absolutely will, and I think, depending on how, if everyone's healthy, you're probably looking at some sort of like Alan Craig, John Jay, one of those guys is DHing. Well, Berkman will DH, but one of those guys will fill his role in the outfield probably. But yeah, you don't know right now with the injuries they have who's going to play. I mean, we might see who's that kid they just called up? Tosma.
Yeah, Cosma. Pete
Cosma.
Oh, by the way, Pete Cosma. 2-something batting average, 284 on base, 284 slugging at AAA.
At AAA, and he's up. And
that's Brian Bocatia.
And he could, yes, it is. Be careful when you say that. But yes, he is. And he, if he DH this weekend, it wouldn't shock me. It would surprise me, not shock me. But so you see, and a team like Houston is an interesting team because they just don't really have anyone.
Yeah, they don't have the talent to really
play. Carlos Lee DHs, but then who fills it for Carlos Lee? Matt Downs, I guess. So,
I mean, it would be beautiful if Michael Bourne were there because then it would be obvious he'd just go in. But no.
Yeah, and the other interesting one is the Cubs because they got this kid, Tony Campana, who's the speedster, is kind of Michael Bourne-like. It'd be interesting if he got at-bats, could steal some bases for a team, so that's a name to file away for head-to-head people if he gets at-bats for some reason.
Now, do you put any stock into the idea that National League pitchers going up against the American League hitters is a particular matchup to avoid? Do you think that the lead differences are still as pronounced as they have been in previous years? What are your general feelings on that?
I mean, I just think it's a case by case. I mean, if you got, I think Arizona's facing the Twins. I mean, the Twins can't hit.
Right.
I don't think facing Ian Kennedy is going to suddenly make them hit if they couldn't hit, Brandon McCarthy or whoever. So it's a case by case thing, and it's the same. I treat it the same as I've always treated it. If this is a good offensive team, then I'm leery, and if they're a bad offensive team, I'm not.
All right, man. Well, thanks for joining us.
All right.